Heidi ho, thrill seekers! And today there's stuff I want to talk about. Before I talk about it, I want to tell you that all three of my talks from Benediktushof, which I talked about Hjakajos Fox. Benediktushof is a retreat center in Germany, and I talked about Hjakajos Fox there. My eyes are weird this morning, and I put all those talks up on the podcast, which you can find on everywhere that podcasts are found. I find it on Spotify, so I know it's there, and it's on Podbean, and it's on all kinds of other platforms. So go look for that podcast and listen to it. And I have been putting new old stuff on my blog for a while now, and I just put another chapter of my, well, not really a chapter, but sort of a semi-chapter from my proposed self-help Buddhist book that I never finished, and so that's up there, as well as a lot of other new old stuff. So those of you who have been accustomed to my blog not having much on it, well, I got stuff on it now, so go look at that. That's hardcorezen.info. Thanks a lot. Okay, so yesterday I was looking at the internets, and I came across this video by Donald Hoffman, and I will put a link below if I can find the video again. I hope I can. If I found it, there's a link below if you're watching on YouTube. So Donald Hoffman is a guy I've talked about before. He wrote a book called The Case Against Reality, and he's a physicist who is proposing this theory that consciousness is more fundamental than space-time. And this particular video, he gives a pretty concise version of his theory, and I just took some notes from it, and I'm just going to read it out to you. You can see him talking about it on his video, but here's a summary of what I think is the most salient points. Okay, here we go. Most of us in the field of physics, have been physicalists. We've assumed that space, time, and matter are fundamental. The Big Bang happened 13.8 billion years ago. There was no conscious life, and consciousness emerged much later. And the standard scientific approach is to try to understand how inanimate matter and fields could somehow give rise to life and then also to consciousness. So in that spirit, most of the work on consciousness has been trying to start with brain activity and coming up with theories about how brain activity could give rise to conscious experiences. But what's remarkable is, despite all the efforts and the brilliant work, we are not yet able to start with brain activity or physical activity more generally and explain even one specific conscious experience, like the taste of chocolate or the taste of potatoes or the smell of a rose and the sound of a saxophone. So there's no theory, no scientific theory that can start with brain activity and explain how precisely that brain activity must be the taste of chocolate. It could not be the taste of vanilla. Okay, that's one point. And then a little bit later on he says, so my approach is to look at things a little bit differently, to let go of the physicalist assumption for these reasons. It turns out that on evolutionary grounds, it's a theorem of evolution by natural selection that the probability is zero that any of our senses, in fact any of the senses of any organism, tell it any true facts about objective reality. That's weird grammar, but this is a transcript of him talking spontaneously, so you probably get the idea. From an evolutionary point of view, space-time is just your virtual reality headset. This is his theory, or his model for understanding it. And physical objects are like the icons in our headset, and from an evolutionary point of view, this is just there to guide adaptive action. Let us play the game of life in a way that allows us to survive, but not to show us the truth. In fact, evolution specifically hides the truth because we don't need it. And also from physics, we find that physicists are coming to the same conclusion, that space-time is not fundamental, is not as fundamental as they would say. I think that's what he means. Not as fundamental as we once thought is, I think, what he wants to say. Anyway, transcript of a spoken piece. Anyway, here we go. And then he says, space-time is doomed, and they're looking for, I guess, are physicists, they're looking for deeper structures beyond space-time, things like the amplitude sociohedron, I don't know what that is, and cosmological polytypes, don't know what that is, polytopes. They're finding structures beyond space-time that don't have the notions of space and time at all, and which give rise to space-time as an emergent structure. So space-time is not fundamental, it's emergent. Okay, and then here's another bit. Here is where I'm going with a new theory of consciousness. Instead of trying to start with space, time, and matter, I'm not going to start there because our best scientific theories tell us not to start there. They're telling us that space and time and its contents are not the fundamental nature of reality. Something, by the way, that spiritual traditions, including Christianity, he's doing this for a Catholic, something that's sponsored by the Vatican, I think, this video. Including Christianity, have said for millennia, and now science is actually getting to theories which agree. Then he goes, some implications of this theory are that the distinction we make between living and non-living is not a fundamental distinction. It's an artifact of our interface. Our interface necessarily is trying to simplify things, and when I look at a human face, I get a lot of information about the consciousness of the person I'm interacting with. When I look at a cat, my interface is giving me less information about the consciousness that I'm interacting with. When you see a rat or a mouse, even less, and when I look at bacterium, even less, and when I look at a rock, I have no insight from my interface about the nature of the consciousness that I'm interacting with. So this is a bit like Dogen. Dogen talks about Mujo Seppo, the insentient preach the Dharma, and he has this idea, the same idea, that so-called insentient things are actually sentient, that there isn't a distinction. And here's more Hoffman. I'm proposing a mathematical model of networks of conscious agents beyond space-time as the fundamental reality, and we're working on a mathematical mapping from that network of conscious agents into space-time that can then give back our current scientific theories as projections of that deeper theory, and then we'll understand how consciousness, not space-time, is fundamental. Okay. This theory of conscious agents is trying to make the idea that consciousness is fundamental mathematically precise so that we can then make mathematically precise mappings from the network of conscious agents into space-time. Now here's where we get tricky. That way, once we have that mathematical mapping, we can then reverse engineer space-time and then be able to play with the very nature of space-time itself. We can re-engineer it and play with it, and so this is going to open up all sorts of new possibilities. And he says some stuff other than that, but that's the part I want to talk about. So this idea of consciousness being more fundamental than space-time is definitely part of the Buddhist worldview, part of the Hindu worldview, part of the Christian mystical worldview. It's really in there in a lot of these contemplative, meditative traditions. So I'm not going to argue with that. I'm interested in the fact that a scientist is working on this and trying to create mathematical models. Now, when he starts to say that with these mathematical models, we'll be able to play with space-time itself, and what does he say? Play with the very structure of space-time itself and open up new possibilities. This is where I want to get into it. So, now, what follows here is a bit of wild speculation. And the Zen tradition frowns upon wild speculation, so I'm kind of going outside my own tradition by speculating wildly, but here goes, because I think it's fun and enjoyable and maybe it's entertaining. When we talk about aliens, okay, I know, aliens, okay, it's not unreasonable to think that there are probably things out there, creatures, animals, somewhat similar to us, who have been around for much longer than we have. If we know the size of space that we're dealing with, and the time, the length of time that we're dealing with, as physicists have shown us now, is much longer than what we used to think, which was, the church said it was 4,000 years or something. Now it turns out it's billions of years. So it's perfectly reasonable to believe that there could be creatures out there who are way more advanced than us. Creatures for whom their equivalent of the year 2021 was 1,000 years ago, or 10,000 years ago, or 100,000 years ago, or 1,000,000 years ago, or 1,000,000,000 years ago. That is all well within the realm of possibility. This isn't even wild speculation here. I mean, not this particular part of it. But if we get into the wild speculation bit, when we think about those things, and I've been a science fiction fan for years, and I know how this goes, most people sort of project the idea that we have it right. At this point, we understand the fundamental nature of reality now, and they extrapolate that to 1,000 years, or 10,000 years, or 1,000,000 years, or 1,000,000,000 years into the future. And they imagine aliens would have spaceships, and there would be machines, and they would go, according to the laws of physics, and, et cetera, et cetera. What if, here's the speculation part, what if our current understanding of the nature of reality is just a phase? Our current understanding, which we are really solid in, which we really, really believe in, and all our theories about it, what if it's just a phase? Because there have been phases like this in human history that we look back upon now and go, oh yeah, those guys were wrong with their, Earth-centric view of the solar system and all this other stuff. You could find dozens of examples of things that were entirely wrong, but people really believed them. So the things that we really believe now might also be entirely wrong. So maybe an alien species that's 1,000,000 years in advance of us is working with a model of reality that might be closer to what Hoffman is proposing, in which consciousness is fundamental and space-time is emergent from consciousness. And they might be working on something like that, which would then mean that, now see, this is where I get weird, but, stuff like UFOs and all this paranormal stuff, which, as I say, the Zen tradition doesn't really get into. But it might be that there's an explanation for that is perfectly rational in its own way, but it takes into account an entirely different way of understanding reality. Now, here's the part I really want to talk about that I'm getting right to at the end of the video, but because I think you need all that build-up to get to this. What Hoffman is proposing about playing with the fundamental, what does he say again? Play with the very structure of space-time itself and opening up new possibilities. I think we got to be careful with that stuff. I guess things are going to go the way they go, and there's not much you can do to change how, reality is going to develop in its own way, and history is going to develop in its own way. But to me, this is as dangerous as discovering the structure of the atom and then going, oh look, we can make a bomb out of that, or discovering the structure of the DNA in a virus and saying, oh look, we can engineer that. And that's a dangerous thing, and we've already seen how both of those have led us into troubled waters. So this idea of going beyond that and trying to reverse engineer space-time itself, or whatever Hoffman says, that's some stuff that gives me pause. Because there's nothing... Okay, one of the things you have to understand is you need a lot more than just a mathematical model to start playing with the nature of space-time itself. I mean, the mathematical model might lead you into something, but it's going to take a different kind of work, and I'm specifically talking about meditative work and that kind of thing is going to be necessary before we can start doing any of that on any sort of a big scale. So there is that, but even considering the idea that a meditative practice is going to be necessary in order for humanity to take this next leap, that a widespread meditative practice, that everybody, maybe not everybody, but lots and lots and lots of people are going to have to be meditators, not just this tiny minority that there is now. So that would be one step. But there's also the fundamental problem that the so-called enlightenment experience or awakening and all of this, and I've said this a bunch of times here, does not automatically make you morally perfect, does not automatically make it impossible for you to make the wrong decisions, as we have seen from a lot of enlightened masters to this, already. Sorry, my grammar is getting all screwy. But we've seen enlightened masters who've gone terribly wrong, and we don't need to name names, but you know who some of them are, and you can go look them up. And one of the ways of understanding this for a lot of people is go, oh, well, they weren't really enlightened. Well, it depends on what you mean by enlightenment. But I don't think it means they didn't have that awakening experience. I hate double negatives, right? I think it means that I think a lot of them had genuine awakening experiences. I even suspect that people like Charles Manson and some of these horrible people in history who did terrible crimes might also have had a glimpse of that so-called awakening experience, because it tends to imbue one with incredible confidence and a feeling that one can do no wrong. That's where things get sticky, because I think you can still do wrong even after having that sort of awakening experience, that experience of understanding the fundamental nature of consciousness and space-time, and seeing that they aren't exactly what you've been told they are, and understanding that once you get there and once you have that understanding, there's a lot of stuff you can do that most people can't do. And I don't mean necessarily walking on water or feeding the multitude with 2 fishes and 2 loaves, that kind of miracle stuff. It gives one a kind of a power, especially a social power, that can be very dangerous, because you understand the fundamental nature of the person that you're interacting with in a way that the person you're interacting with doesn't. And so you can go right back into that I'm me and you're an object sort of understanding of the reality, but now with this newfound power that can make you a kind of a dangerous actor. That's what I really think, and I think that's something we all need to be careful with, and I assume that people who are watching a video like this are already concerned with this sort of meditation and with stuff like that, and that's why I'm telling you, be careful with that stuff. Don't be Donald Hoffman going, yeah, let's go play with the nature of space and time and open up new possibilities. You know, he's maybe saying that as a pitch and as a way to get people interested in this thing, and okay, that's fine as far as it goes, but we have to be careful with this. And so, you know, my feelings for Donald Hoffman have always been a bit like, you know, he's got some things right, but he's going in a little bit of a shaky direction, because maybe he doesn't understand exactly the power of what he is playing with and what he's getting into and what he's suggesting. He might not understand that it is in its own way as powerful as hacking into the atom and making the atom bomb, or hacking into the genome of a virus and making something that's really dangerous, those kind of things. It's of that level of possible problematic stuff. Okay, so there you go. That's my little rant about Donald Hoffman, and I'll put the link to the video below if I can find it. But if you want to support me making rants like this, there's a URL appearing on your screen if you're watching this on video, and that is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. You go there and you can find my Patreon and PayPal links, and I will be very happy if you send me a donation, because that is my main means of support, is your donations. So I really, really appreciate those of you who continue to donate. But as I always say, this is offered for free, so you don't have to donate if you don't want to. So don't give me flack for asking for this, but I have to ask it because that's how I make my living. So we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Why are you licking my leg? You like the taste of my leg? Okay. You can lick my leg.